Super Paper Mario. These three words alone are enough to scare some fans of its prequels. After the huge critical successes that were Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door, Nintendo began working on another entry on the GameCube that would later become Super Paper Mario on the Wii. Instead of being a follow-up to the first two games, Super completely changed things up. Gone were the turn-based battles and semi-open worlds, and our side-scrolling gameplay, platformer battles, and a very linear game design where you go from one disconnected level to another. This completely split the fan base. On one side you have fans of the original two games who hated the departure, and on the other hand, you have people that welcome this new style. Now there are things to love here, even if you don't like the gameplay. The story is widely considered to be the best in the entire Mario series, the music is great, the characters are brand new, the chapters are bursting with creativity, and there is at least RPG progression here. I'll get to all of that more in detail as I explain what made Super Paper Mario a cult classic and why it's one of my favorite games ever. When you talk about Super Paper Mario, the gameplay is always the elephant in the room, or the giant butterfly in the room if we're being more accurate. Even now, almost 2 decades later, and damn that makes me feel old to say, this is still what fans argue about the most. Because for better or worse, the gameplay is where Super Paper Mario took its biggest risk. To understand why things felt so jarring back in 2007, you have to remember the context. Paper Mario was defined by turn-based combat, and that was the backbone of the series' identity. Strategy, timing, badges, partners, these were the things that gave the first two entries their depth. Battles were rewarding, instead of just jump, stop, move on. You built your own playstyle, you experimented, you got attached to partners because they were with you in every fight. So when Super Paper Mario removed traditional battles entirely, that was huge. It wasn't a small tweak, it was ripping out arguably the most important mechanic in the entire franchise and replacing it with something that didn't even look like Paper Mario anymore. Combat in Super is simple, almost aggressively simple. There's no menu for it, there's no audience, no badges, no FP management, no which partner do I pick for this turn. There are pixels, but that's not the same. If you run into one from the side, you take damage. Sometimes you pick enemies up and throw them. Sometimes Bowser just breathes fire and vaporizes them. Mechanically, it's way closer to Super Mario Bros. Than Thousand-Year Door in a lot of ways. And on paper, get it, that sounds like a downgrade. And if you went in wanting the Thousand-Year Door too, it absolutely felt different. But the more you play it, the more you realize that the simplicity is intentional. Super doesn't want combat to be the main event. It wants combat to just be gameplay between puzzles, exploration, story beats. If turn-based battles were meant to be strategic, Super's combat is just pressing a button. It keeps you moving, it keeps the pacing brisk, it lets the game throw weird ideas at you without slowing everything down. But of course, the biggest gameplay shift, the one that truly defines this game, is the flip mechanic. That first moment when Bustovius extorts Mario for an absurd fee and then grants him the 3D flip is just burned into a lot of people's memories. So the first time you realize that this is what makes the game different, the ability to shift from a traditional 2D Mario level to a hidden 3D layer changes everything. Suddenly, simple hallways become complex spaces, dead ends become secret paths, seemingly harmless room in 2D hides a swarm of enemies in 3D. You start thinking about every area from multiple angles, quite literally, and the game constantly plays with that idea. Flipping reveals hidden ladders, secret passages, invisible platforms, and entire rooms that just don't exist in 2D. Sometimes it's used for environmental storytelling, like the way Merly's mansion feels more sinister when you reveal its hidden parts, or how the Bitlands level feels like stepping backstage into the game's debug room. This mechanic often rewards curiosity, and as a kid, I love this. I thought this was the greatest idea ever. The flip also creates a rhythm no other Paper Mario game has. Every level has a mix between what's visible and what's hidden, between the obvious path and the one only curious players will find. It subtly reinforces one of the story's core themes, that things aren't always what they seem. Now, I think this could have been implemented better. I think a lot of the secrets are pretty easy to find. I would have loved if there was more hidden ones, and I think this is an idea that, if it came back, could definitely have a lot more substance. But anyway, moving on from that, we gotta talk about the pixel system, which is Super's version of partners. Pixels are just essentially your ability loadout. Thorough lets you grab and throw enemies at objects, Boomer's your bomb, Slim turns you paper thin to slip through tight spaces or avoid attacks, Dottie shrinks you to explore tiny doors and pipes, and so on. Dudley lets you ground pound, Carrie turns into a platform you could ride, Fleep does optical illusion nonsense and messes with space like 2 times in the game, Cudge is your hammer, who you get surprisingly late in the game when the hammer was like a core mechanic of the original too. Pixels have some personality when you first meet them, but after that they do almost nothing. There's not the same emotional depth or on-screen personality as Goombella or Vivian, or really any of the previous partners, especially the ones in Thousand-Year Door. And also, there's a neat nod to the partners. In Mario's house in the beginning, you can see these pictures that have the partners from the original games on them. The pixels here, they're just more like tools that are used for puzzle solving and combat, and just general things in the gameplay. Is that emotionally engaging as having a full cast of partners comment on everything? No, but for this game structure, it does work, and this is really the last time we'd get partners until Origami King, and that was extremely extremely limited. Like in an action platformer, you don't want a battle system that just stops the game every 10 seconds. You just want to be able to make quick decisions, and Pixels make that possible. And Super does quietly keep some RPG DNA through leveling and stats. You still gain XP, you still level up, and your HP and attack power go up as you progress. The difference is that you're not grinding in the traditional sense. Like you don't have to sit in one area fighting Goombas for half an hour. Just get stronger by playing the game, and honestly, you don't even need this. You could skip most of the enemies in this. Then we've got the playable characters, and then of course there's Mario. Like he's your all-around character. Like if he didn't have the flip mechanic, no one would use him. That's what makes him the most used character in this game, maybe besides Bowser for some people. But anyway, Peach has defensive and platforming utility with her Parasol Glide. Bowser's just a walking nuke with a double attack stat and flamethrower. Luigi's insane super jump turns vertical platforming into a joke once you unlock him. Like this was my favorite power-up to use for some reason. Like I just love using Luigi's jump where you just press down and hold up and he just goes super high up. What's clever is how the game introduces them. Peach joins early and immediately changes as you approach certain hazards. Like immediately in 2-1 you use her Parasol Glide. Bowser joins in after beating him in a fight, Luigi shows up late after his whole Mr. L saga, and suddenly areas that seem tough early on become trivial if you come back to them. The game basically speedruns the Metroidvania satisfaction of revisiting old places with new tools, but in a Mario context, and it is far more limited. Like, this is not close to a Metroidvania, but it kind of has that feel at times, if that makes sense. And we can't ignore the variety in level gimmicks. One chapter might play like a straightforward Mario level, the next might revolve around a weird Coliseum of Duels, another might trap you in a Ruby-based sweatshop nightmare, another might play like an arcade shooter, another might become a mythological climb through the afterlife. Does every idea land perfectly? No. The early space sections in Chapter 4 are slow. Samus Kingdom drags when you're doing what feels like the 50th duel. A few pixels feel underused. The platforming itself is generally very easy, but the game is constantly trying something new, and that constant experimentation is a huge part of its charm. Most importantly though, the gameplay supports the story rather than competing with it. Super doesn't want to be a 1000-Year Door 2, it just wants to be its own thing. It's an action-oriented adventure with RPG progression, puzzle-heavy levels, and a narrative that pushes way further than you'd expect. And the more time that passes, the easier it is to appreciate that. If the gameplay is what divided fans, the characters are what brought people back together. Even players who will just never like Super Paper Mario shift away from turn-based battles will usually agree on one thing: this game has one of the strongest casts in the entire Mario franchise. Might be a couple other things they agree with, like the story and the music, but this is another one. This is where the game's heart, that is pure, really lives. The story doesn't work without these characters, it just doesn't. Let's start with the main heroes, who I did go over, like how you use them in terms of gameplay, but now for their character arcs. Mario is, well, Mario. Peach actually becomes an active participant, and instead of being kidnapped by Bowser, Bowser helps you instead of being an antagonist here, well, at least for the most part. And then there's Luigi. Luigi might have the best arc in this game. At first he's missing, then you find him in an in-between dimension, confused and trying to figure out what's going on. Then he disappears again, and suddenly this masked theatrical villain named Mr. L, who definitely isn't Luigi, who's complete with one of the hardest themes in the game, shows up and fights you. So instead of being overshadowed, he becomes a literal inverted version of himself. I mean, look at his hat, it's a backwards L. When Luigi eventually breaks free of that control and rejoins the party, it feels a lot more emotional than other games. Like, you've gotten your brother back after he was a villain. But also gives the late game scenes with him and Dementio a lot more weight. And speaking of Dementio, we gotta talk about the villains in this game. Let's start with Count Bleck, because he's one of the best villains Nintendo's ever written. Not just in Mario in general, like, he's one of the best villains in any Nintendo game. He's theatrical, he's charismatic, he's immediately memorable with a cape and monocle, but behind all that is someone who's deeply broken. He's far from a one-dimensional villain, and it doesn't feel like they're just forcing a backstory on him. Like, he doesn't want to conquer the world, he wants to erase it, and the reason isn't power, but it's heartbreak. That is already wild for a Mario villain. Like, usually villains' motivations are,
I like being bad. It makes me happy.
But here they actually have depth. Bleck, who you also find out is also known as Bloomier, his entire plan comes from grief. He's a tragic character who genuinely believes the only way to deal with his loss is to end everything. The way the game slowly reveals his backstory with Tippy, also known as Timpani, is really great. You get glimpses through storybooks, cutscenes, and other characters' hints, but by the time you've pieced together the full picture, it just recontextualizes everything you've seen him do. Also, like I mentioned, Tippy/Timpani, your companion, is also tied directly into that tragedy. At first, Tippy plays the classic helper role. She just points out secrets, giving hints, scanning enemies. But as the game goes on, she starts reacting to things in ways that don't quite fit that role. Certain places feel familiar to her, certain names hit a nerve, certain encounters with Count Bleck feel charged with emotion that she doesn't fully understand. When the game finally confirms that Tippy is Timpani, it just hits really hard. Suddenly this little butterfly that's been floating by your side the whole time has been a huge part of the story, without you even realizing it. Count Bleck and Tippy's relationship is the backbone of Super Paper Mario. Without them, the void is just another doomsday threat. With them, it represents one person's grief. And that's not something you'd expect a Mario game to pull off. Then we we have Bleck's inner circle, which is O-Chunks, Mimi, Anastasia, and Dementio. O-Chunks is a lovable character. He's big, he's loud, he's competitive. His arc from comic relief boss to genuine ally, especially in Chapter 8 where he helps Bowser hold up the ceiling and urges the heroes to go on without him, adds surprising heart to his character. Like, this was very unexpected. Mimi is chaos in the shape of a small green girl. She's smug, she's petty, and then suddenly she snaps her neck 180 degrees and turns into a giant robotic spider monster that traumatized us, yes us, as kids. Her shifts between fake politeness and being as sadistic as Nintendo telling us we're getting Sticker Star 4 make her one of the more unsettling Mario villains. She doesn't want to rule or destroy the world, she just wants to toy with people. Like, she literally owns a sweatshop. That makes her feel dangerous in a very specific, unhinged way. Anastasia is Bleck's right hand, just loyal, intelligent, constantly torn between following his orders and wanting him to move on from his heartbreak. Her hypnosis ability is scary, and we do see it used multiple times, but her scenes with Bleck show that she cares about him on a personal level. Her sacrifice near the end, where she throws herself in front of an attack meant for him, is quietly one of the most touching moments in a Mario game. And then there's Dementio. Dementio is the wild card. He's the jester, the guy who walks into scenes, cracks jokes, makes weirdly poetic comments, and then quietly manipulates everyone while pretending to just be there for comic relief. He acts like Count Bleck's clown, but he's always a few steps ahead of everyone else. What makes Dementio brilliant is how his personality and his true intentions line up. He hides his cruelty behind this facade, just the heroes for fun while secretly gathering information. He helps and portrays people interchangeably. When he finally reveals he's been plotting to betray Bleck and use the Chaos Heart for his own ends, it's a fantastic twist. He's funny, he's terrifying, and he's easily one of the most iconic Mario villains of all time. Like, go to any Mario RPG fan Discord or community and see how many people have Dementio profile pictures. You know what, I'm sure there's plenty of people in the comments here with Dementio profile pictures. Go check that right now. On top of all that, you've got the NPCs, the citizens of Flipside, Flopside, the Nimbies, the Cragnons, the Sammer guys, the D-men in the underwear. There's the bartender who tells you lore, scammers who run shady magical businesses, sad little side characters who lost things in the void, random weirdos with one-off jokes, these Mario and Luigi wannabes. The world feels populated in a way that makes each area feel distinct. Super Paper Mario may not have traditional partners, but it doesn't lack memorable personalities. And once you fall in love with this cast, the rest of the game hits way harder than you'd expect. Super Paper Mario's levels are where the game's creativity really shows off. This isn't a game that gives you 8 slightly different spins on grass, desert, and lava worlds like the recent Paper Mario games. Instead, every chapter feels like its own unique concept. Some are stronger than others, but almost all of them are memorable, at least in some way. Let's walk through them all, and if you want to skip me recapping the chapters, just go to this timestamp on screen. Lineland starts out looking like your standard Mario opener. Green hills, Goombas, pipes, nothing too wild. But the second Mario learns to flip into 3D, the game shows its real hand. That first flip in 1-1 is the moment Super Paper Mario becomes Super Paper Mario. What looked like a simple 2D homage suddenly has hidden depth, like literally and metaphorically. You're not just running right anymore, like you're thinking about what might be behind the wall, under the platforms, or just hiding in the background. From there, Lineland's job is pretty straightforward. It introduces Thorough, get you used to mixing abilities with spatial thinking, and then caps it off with Fractale. Chapter 2 is where the tone really shifts. Lone Valley already feels moodier and more atmospheric, but once you hit Merle's Mansion, the game fully leans into just weird, funny, slightly unsettling. Mimi's fake friendliness, the broken vases, the ridiculous debt, and Ruby Grind where it takes like 12 real hours to beat but can be done by just getting a code. It all builds this feeling that the whole place is a scam you're trapped inside. Then the chapter goes from silly to actually scary with the basement chase and Spider Mimi. And like I mentioned before, for a lot of kids this was nightmare fuel. And the payoff with the That's My Merle game show and the Mimi boss fight is just peak Paper Mario. Horror 1 minute, comedy game show the next, and somehow it all works. This was also a direct reference to previous Paper Mario games with their own quizzes. Like the original was the 64th quiz, TTYD had the 65th, Super had the 66th. Unfortunately, Sticker Star had a different quiz show, and it was not the 67th quiz show. Chapter 3 is the game really showing off the retro-inspired style. Like, the entire game is a nod to retro games, because all the characters just have that blocky look. There's like the retro-sounding music that also sounds modern, but it kind of sounds like a chiptune at the same time. At the beginning of the chapter, Tippy gets kidnapped by Francis, and that gives this chapter more emotional stakes, because you want to get your companion back from this Redditor lizard. Fort Francis is where it all comes together. It's a fortress built by him, and he awards technology, figures, and catmates, because of course he does. The whole level is a parody of fan culture, and the Swoon.exe segment with Peach is just one of the funniest scenes in the game. And also, funnily enough, Francis is also directly referenced in the Invincible comics, and I did a short on that. Chapter 4 is probably the most divisive chapter in the game. The slow, floaty movement in early space areas can feel like hitting a brick wall made of jello, and then there's more empty space, quite literally. And it is just a slog. Like, if you watch my Super Paper Mario chapters video, I believe I had this in last. But if you do stick with it, there is a payoff at the end. The music and lonely atmosphere, well, not too lonely because you have Squirps, sell the idea that you're actually lost in space. By the time you reach the later areas, the design does tighten up, except for 4-3, I hate this level. The final stretch in 4-4 though, with its gravity tricks and dungeon style puzzles, feels like the real version of what the chapter was going for. And the first robot fight with Mr. L is just one of those set piece moments that defines the mid-game. Like I said, this chapter is really weak overall, but there are still great moments in it. Also, this is the part of the video where I'll just ask if you're enjoying this to like and subscribe. Like, I have a ton of other Mario RPG content and a couple other videos on Super Paper Mario itself, so if you've made it this far in the video, I do think you'll enjoy a lot of my content. Chapter 5 doesn't start especially strong from a pure gameplay perspective. Like, there's some backtracking and a few puzzles that feel more tedious than clever, but what it lacks in pacing early on, it makes up for with world building. Once you head into the caverns and the Florosapien base, the chapter shifts from rescue mission to something more complicated. You start learning about the polluted water, the mind control, and how the Kragnons aren't innocent victims in this story. By the time you fight King Crocus, you realize this isn't a simple good guys versus bad guys chapter at all. It's one of the first times a Mario game really pushes you to rethink who you're siding with. Samurai's Kingdom is the classic great idea, rough execution chapter. On paper, a gauntlet of duels against 100 uniquely named warriors sounds awesome. In practice, the repetition can absolutely wear on you. But the chapter isn't remembered for the fights, it's remembered for what happens in the world. And the second level, the void completely consumes this world, and then when you go back into it, everything's gone. It's just a white landscape with some debris, just some ambient music, and as you just go across this for a couple minutes, there's nothing that changes. That is until you run into Mr. L. And then after you beat him in the robot battle, this is where the story really takes a turn. Chapter 7 takes all that apocalyptic energy and asks, okay, so what happens after you die in this universe? The Underwear and Over There answer that question. You've got Queen Jades running the underworld like a strict but fair manager, River Twig's bed being genuinely unsettling, and the Nimbi, whatever the plural is, living in a heavenly realm that's under attack. This is where Luigi returns in a big way, both mechanically and narratively. And Luffy's story ties the chapter together, learning that she's actually a pure heart in disguise, and watching her choose between staying as who she's become or fulfilling her real purpose is one of the most emotional moments in the entire game. Chapter 7 blends humor, lore, and emotion in a way that most Mario games just don't. Castle Black is the final exam for everything the game has been building up to. The layout and puzzles are tighter, the enemies hit harder, and each segment doubles as a character send-off. Ochunk's last stand with Bowser, Mimi's rematch with Peach, Dementio pushing Luigi to his breaking point where you go through every chapter chasing after him. Everyone gets their moment. Also, that Dementio moment in 8-3, that is one of my favorite moments in any Mario game ever. The fight with Count Black feels like the natural climax of the story, but then Dementio hijacks the ending, fuses with the Chaos Heart, and drags Luigi into his evil bidding one more time. The final battle is not very difficult, but the music's amazing.
After all that,
the story circles back to where it started. The altar, the wedding, Timpani and Bloomy are finally reunited. It's a quiet, bittersweet ending, and this is where real men cried. You learn maybe the real Super was the paper you marred along the way. If Super Paper Mario's gameplay is divisive and its levels are experimental, the music is something that nearly everyone agrees is pretty great. From the very start, Line Land Road sets a tone that's both nostalgic and fresh. Like, it's clearly inspired by classic Mario, but it builds into something more adventurous. There's Mount Lineland that brings a western flavor, and it just works perfectly here. Chapter 2 has great music with Gloom Valley, like, I love this song. And then Merly's Mansion has a tonal shift, where it has a weird time signature to really put you on edge. Like, now I'm gonna show a gameplay clip of being in Merly's Mansion with some more upbeat Mario music, and you'll see why the music really sets the tone here. Then Chapter 3 has some fun music, like that's where it really starts to sound more retro. Francis's battle theme is amazing. Chapter 4 has the grand space kind of music. Chapter 5, I'm not the biggest fan of the music, although the cavern tracks are nice. Then we hit Samurai's Kingdom in Chapter 6, and we get one of the most iconic songs in the entire Paper Mario series. That theme is insanely catchy, the traditional Japanese influence fits the setting perfectly, and it just makes these duels a little bit more bearable. Chapter 7's music has a pretty big contrast, because you go from the Underwear to the Over There, where it goes from really dark and gloomy, and then it goes like a heavenly sound because you're going to the Over There. And then Chapter 8, like the theme you've been hearing for Count Black the whole time, you kind of feel like a different version of that, and it goes really well here. The Ultimate Show is one of my favorite tracks in a Mario game, and there's a lot of other great tracks I didn't even mention, like for some individual levels, for some bosses, of course for Flipside. And then I want to finish off the music segment by talking about the staff credits. It's just a perfect send-off, just feels like the musical summary of the entire adventure. If you had to describe Super Paper Mario in one word, creative wouldn't be a bad pick. This is one of the most imaginative things Nintendo's ever done with Mario, even if you don't think it plays out the best. It's not just a different battle system slapped onto a familiar formula. It's a game that constantly asks what else they can do with this universe. The tone bounces between silly, heartfelt, dark, absurd, but somehow it doesn't feel disjointed at all, and it's really hard to pull off. Like, it can make you laugh at Francis being an absolute goofy goober, then turn around and have you walk the ruins of Sammer's kingdom in silence. It can give you stupid jokes about anime, and then hit you with a tragic love story about two people separated across worlds. And that creativity isn't random, it feeds into the story. Every weird mechanic, strange character, bizarre location supports the bigger theme of the game, fractured worlds, hidden layers, and the idea that underneath all the nonsense, there's something deeply human going on. I already went over a lot of this in the chapter about levels, but I did just want to reiterate it here. Super Paper Mario doesn't have as much side content as the Thousand Year Door does, but what it does have is actually pretty solid. Flipside and Flopside are the hubs, and they feel great to just exist in. They're stacked vertically, full of secrets, and packed with NPCs worth talking to. You've got Merlin, Merly, Novrem, which you won't believe what it is spelled backwards. You've got the fortune tellers, Carson at the bar telling stories about characters you meet, and a bunch of oddballs with one-liners. On top of that, you've got two big optional challenges: the Flipside Pit of 100 Trials and the Flopside Pit. The Flipside Pit is a decent mid-game endurance test that forces you to think about items and pixel use. It's not as intricate as TDYD's Pit, but it still feels satisfying and clear. Also, going to 3D doesn't really help here, because you'll just fall to the bottom. The Flopside Pit is where things get serious. Enemies hit harder, floors feel longer, and you have to be fully prepared. You end up fighting Shadow, who is implied to be the pixel queen you've heard about in the lore, and is one of the coolest Easter egg bosses in a Mario RPG. Fighting Shadow versions of your own party is actually such a good idea that I'm surprised it has been reused more often. There's also cooking, card collecting, hidden chests, secret rooms, and little side quests that give you items, lore, 4 extra pixels, or just fun character interactions. Nothing here feels like fluff. It's all stuff that either makes you stronger or makes the world more interesting. The game doesn't really rely on a big post-game checklist. Instead, the replay value comes from revisiting chapters with your full set of pixels and characters, tackling pits with better stats, and just learning about the lore. It's the kind of game that I played multiple times and I've learned something new every time. And then talking more about additional content, it was so convoluted to get Piccolo. It's basically like a fetch quest after a fetch quest after a fetch quest. One of the reasons Super Paper Mario has such a dedicated fan base today is because many people see it as the last great Paper Mario game before the series fundamentally changed even more. Not the last good one, plenty of people like Color Splash and Origami King, and there are people who like Sticker Star, but this is the last one that really still felt like a Paper Mario game. It might have ditched turn-based battles, but it kept the essence of what made Paper Mario special: leveling up, original characters, meaningful world building, variety, and a willingness to take risks with story and theme. It still feels like a Paper Mario game. Flipside and Flopside are the kind of hubs you'd expect from the series. They're layered, they're full of hidden secrets and side NPCs with witty dialogue. The worlds are more than just visual themes. They have cultures, they have histories. The story is about more than Bowser did something again. After Super, starting with Sticker Star, Nintendo's approach changed. Stories got simpler, unique character designs were heavily restricted, worlds leaned harder into the literal paper gimmick instead of using paper as an aesthetic. Battles became more experimental in ways that didn't always feel rewarding. Like, there's not really any incentive to battle in any of the previous 3 Paper Mario games. You can like those games and still acknowledge they don't feel like Paper Mario, but Super Paper Mario is the bridge between eras. It isn't Thousand Year Door 2, but it still carries that DNA. At the same time, it pushes towards the more action-focused structure that later games would fully embrace. It's experimental without discarding what made the first 2 entries resonate. That's why it feels like the last great Paper Mario in the classic sense. This the last one where the writers and designers clearly had room to make something more ambitious and more thematically rich. It's not remembered because everything after it is terrible, necessarily, but because nothing after it has tried to be this ambitious again. And that's for a reason. Nintendo actually put out a poll asking people what the most important part of this game was, and most people just did not select story. And I think it was a really flawed poll because, yeah, you're not going to play a Mario game for the story. It doesn't mean it's not important in a Mario RPG. Super Paper Mario didn't show up, get crowned a masterpiece, and ride off into the sunset. When it released in 2007, it reviewed well, sold very well for a Paper Mario game, and then it settled into this strange space where fans were just divided. Some loved it, some hated it. A lot of people just said it's good, but it's not the Thousand Year Door. But as time went on, and as the series moved further away from its RPG roots, people started to go back to it. And on those replays, Super Paper Mario started to shine in ways that weren't obvious at launch. And that's what led to it becoming a cult classic. And why is that? Because first, it does things no other Mario game dares to do. Like, Like, this is a Mario game with a cosmic prophecy, with a lot of heartbreak, themes like grief, destiny, sacrifice, and the end of the world, and it doesn't treat any of that as a joke. Like, there's genuine emotional gut punches here. Count Bleck and Timpani's story is haunting and beautiful in a way that few Nintendo narratives are. Second, because the character is unforgettable, like I already talked about all of them. Third, because it balances humor and heart better than almost any other entry. Like, yeah, something like Color Splash has good humor, but it doesn't have the same heart as this. I also think Super Paper Mario is just funnier, like Francis himself with Swoon.exe, Bowser's ego, Dementio's lines, just tiny NPC jokes everywhere. Fourth, because its gameplay is bold, experimental, and weird. The flip mechanic, the multi-character platforming, the pixel system, the genre-shifting level design. It's not a safe game. Say what you will about this game, it does not play it safe. Fifth, because it represents the end of an era. It's the last entry with this much narrative and creative freedom, and stands out a lot more as time goes on. Sixth, because it aged shockingly well. The writing still holds up, the story hits, the music is still amazing, the graphics still look good, and it's different than really any other game on the market. There's absolutely nothing like this. Like, you can find other games like Paper Mario. Like, it doesn't mean they're as good as the original Paper Mario and 1000 Year Door, but there are games with similar styles, like Bug Fables is a great one. But there's not a single other game I can think of that's even remotely close to Super Paper Mario in terms of style. And finally, because Super Paper Mario means different things to different people. For some, it was their first Paper Mario. For others, it was this weird Wii game they didn't get as a kid, but came back to it later and fell in love with it. For some, it's the story that made them emotional on Mario game for the first time. And for others, it's just the game that traumatized them. That personal connection is what makes something a cult classic. It's not just that people like it, it's that it just sticks. Like, it's a game that shouldn't exist and fundamentally changed a beloved series, but even 18 years later, there's still YouTubers who primarily cover this game and get tons of views. There's also a very dedicated speedrun community that I myself briefly attempted to be part of before realizing I didn't have the patience. It's impressive that this game is now old enough to be an adult and still is getting so much content about it. I doubt we ever get a Super Paper Mario 2, but I would really love that. I would love if they tried to have two different Paper Mario series, like a Super Paper Mario and like a 1000 Year Door style series, because these are two very fundamentally different games, and I know that will absolutely never happen. That's just a pipe dream, but it's just fun to think about. So I hope you enjoy this video on Super Paper Mario, just what made it special, what made it a cult classic, why I personally love it. If you don't like Super Paper Mario, that's totally fine. This is just my experience. Even if you watched through this whole video and still don't agree with me, like, at least you got my perspective on it and why I love this game so much. And if you like this style of video where I just like fully go over a game, like do a deep dive on one singular game, let me know in the comments. Let me know if there's another game you'd like for me to talk about in this style. And let me know if there's other Paper Mario or Mario RPG content you'd like to see me cover. If you have not yet, please be sure to like and subscribe and join my Discord, because I'm trying to build a community over there. And if you want, for just a couple bucks a month, you can become a channel member here and get exclusive content. Thank you for watching Domainy, and I'll see you next time.